The title of this presentation is Odds Thinking Not Even Wrong, and there's also a second title, The Closing of the Scientific Mind When Untestable Assumptions Pass for Experimental Fact, Violating Carl Sagan's Rules for Sound Science. Now, the first title, Not Even Wrong, is a phrase that Wolfgang Pauli, a noted physicist, came up with quite a while back, and he applied it to theories which were not falsifiable or theories that were bad science. It's a derogatory term, obviously, and people use it to put down ideas that are not testable very often. The second title, The Closing of the Scientific Mind, is a reference to an Alan Bloom book called The Closing of the American Mind that he wrote quite a while ago, bemoaning the state of higher education. Now, my subtitle, When Untestable Assumptions Pass for Experimental Fact, Violating Carl Sagan's Rules for Sound Science, is really what this talk is all about. What we're going to find is that there are assumptions in science that are passing as fact, and they don't pass the test that Carl Sagan set up to evaluate scientific beliefs or scientific theories. So let's talk a little bit about Carl Sagan and his belief that you need facts, experiments, testability, empirical evidence as the basis for science, as opposed to assumptions, opinion, ideology, sort of a viewpoint. And you may remember the movie My Cousin Vinny, when at the very end of the movie, the judge says to one of the actors, "Is that a fact or an opinion?" It was Marissa Tomei. And she said, "That's a fact, Your Honor." And he's very interested in knowing how could that be a fact when it seems like she's just offering an opinion. So if we talk about fact versus opinion, I'm going to show some very well-known concepts in science that are actually opinions, not facts. One of the concepts that's out there is that chance and randomness rule our lives. And there's a book by a fellow named Leonard Mlodinow, who came up with a book. His book is called The Drunkard's Walk, How Randomness Rules Our Lives. And he believes that our lives are shaped by random forces and random events. And that's pretty much the premise of the whole book, and he tries to explain those things. Michael Starbird, a mathematician at the University of Texas at Austin, says it was a chance combination of genes that produced you. Natalie Anger, who's a reporter for the New York Times, wrote in a book called The Canon, "You have, of course, a 50% chance of tossing a head or a tail with each throw," when she's talking about a die. In other words, a probability of 0.5. Now, this last belief that you have an equal probability of getting a heads or a tail on the toss of a coin is not subject to testing, and it doesn't pass Sagan's rules for sound science. Now, I have a coin here that I'm going to throw and demonstrate that there is no evidence that both heads and tails are equally likely on the toss of a single coin. So we've got a heads and we've got a tails, and let's assume that this is a quote-unquote fair coin. When you toss it, you get a result, and this result is a heads. There's no evidence that it could have come up otherwise. There's no evidence that right now we could be in a state of tails. So the error that Anger has made has to do with something related to the hypothesis of equal a priori probabilities. The hypothesis means an educated guess. The belief that heads and tails are equally likely on the toss of a single coin is only a guess. It is not a fact. It is not testable. There's a fellow named Richard Tolman, who is a very well-known physicist from several decades ago, who wrote a book called The Principles of Statistical Mechanics. And he looks at this hypothesis in detail, and he says the methods have to be based on account of their statistical character on some hypothesis as to the a priori likelihood of different possibilities. And he says the hypothesis is introduced at the start without proof as a necessary postulate. So, as I was saying before, there is no proof that heads and tails are equally likely when you toss this coin.